For months, two self-proclaimed HOA officers had been running a scam, shaking down unsuspecting homeowners with bogus fines, especially targeting the elderly. They carried themselves with an air of authority, flashing fake badges and handing out fraudulent violation notices, demanding payments under the threat of escalating penalties. But tonight they had made a grave mistake. They had chosen the wrong target. Under the glow of his porch light, Ethan Holloway pulled into his driveway, exhausted from a grueling 20-hour shift. All he wanted was a hot shower, a decent meal, and a few hours of sleep before the chaos of his job demanded his attention once more. But before he could even shut off the engine, something caught his eye. Flashing lights. Not the red and blue of real law enforcement, but a cheap, orange and white strobe haphazardly, affixed to a dark SUV parked across the street. Then movement. Two figures emerged from the shadows, marching up his driveway like they owned the place. Logan Tate, the taller of the two, carried himself like a drill sergeant, his wiry frame stiff with self-importance. Derek Slater, shorter but built like a brick wall, strutted forward with an arrogance that reeked of a man who thought himself untouchable. Both wore tactical vests emblazoned with bold white letters, HOA Enforcement. Ethan barely had time to process before Derek barked, "Hands where we can see them." He blinked. Had exhaustion finally driven him to hallucinations? Logan took another step forward, his voice dripping with unearned authority. "You're in violation of HOA regulations. Step away from the vehicle." Silence. Then a slow exhale from Ethan. "I don't live in an HOA." Logan barely hesitated. "Doesn't matter," he shot back. "We enforce compliance everywhere in the community." A flicker of amusement crossed Ethan's face. He had dealt with criminals of all kinds, career felons, cartel enforcers, desperate men with nothing left to lose. But this was a new level of stupidity. That's when he saw it. Plastic handcuffs dangling from Derek's belt loop. A switch flipped in Ethan's mind. Exhaustion melted away. The sluggishness of his long shift vanished. Now there was only clarity. These weren't just power-hungry HOA zealots. They were playing cop, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. Ethan Holloway had been on the force long enough to know when something felt off. And this was beyond off. Standing in his own driveway, he watched as Logan Tate and Derek Slater squared their shoulders, posturing like they had real authority. The problem? They didn't. But they sure as hell thought they did. Derek, the stockier of the two, stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "We've had complaints." Ethan raised a brow. "Oh?" Logan, eager to assert himself, took over. "Unauthorized fencing," he said, counting off with his fingers. "Non-compliant driveway color. And multiple reports of hostile behavior toward HOA officials." Ethan stared at them, not in shock, but in pure, unfiltered disbelief. He let the words settle in the air before responding, voice even, deliberate. "I don't live in an HOA." Logan barely hesitated. "Doesn't matter," he shot back. "We enforce compliance everywhere in the community. You can either cooperate or we'll be forced to take action." That's when Ethan saw them. The plastic handcuffs, cheap, dangling from Derek's belt. A slow, creeping realization settled in. These guys weren't just on a power trip. They were about to try and arrest him. For the briefest moment, Ethan considered playing along, just to see how deep their delusion ran. But then Logan took a step forward, hand drifting toward his belt, as if gearing up to escalate the situation. And that's when Ethan decided enough was enough. "Do you have a badge?" Ethan asked, voice calm, measured. Derek huffed, shifting his weight. "We don't need your approval to enforce HOA laws." Ethan let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "Your laws?" Logan smirked. "We got a call about a suspicious person on this property," he said, his tone laced with manufactured authority. "You match the description." And just like that, the game revealed itself. Ethan had seen this tactic before. Make someone doubt their own innocence. Force them into compliance. It was a power move, a scare tactic. And these two? They were drunk on it. Ethan let the silence stretch, let them squirm. Then finally he spoke. "I suggest you leave," he said, voice even, steady, "before you get yourselves into serious trouble." Derek laughed, deep and mocking. "We're not going anywhere." He took a step closer. "Matter of fact, you're under arrest for trespassing on HOA land." Ethan actually chuckled this time, shaking his head. My property is HOA land now? Logan's eyes darkened, and then he made his mistake. He reached for his cuffs. And just like that, they were done. Derek Slater's hand moved toward his belt, fingers grazing the plastic handcuffs. That was all the confirmation Ethan Holloway needed. They were actually going to try this. Ethan moved fast, too fast for either of them to react. His right hand shot out, grabbing Logan Tate's wrist midair, twisting it just enough to make the man buckle. A sharp gasp escaped Logan's lips as the cuff slipped from his grasp, landing uselessly on the pavement. In the same motion, Ethan yanked the cuffs away, his movements fluid, practiced, unstoppable. Derek took an instinctive step back, blinking, his bravado cracking. He had just watched his partner get disarmed in a single move. And now, panic was setting in. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out his badge. With a flick of his wrist, he held it up to their faces, letting the golden emblem catch the porch light. Chief of Police, silence. Logan's mouth opened, then closed. Derek looked like he was 5 seconds from throwing up. Ethan tilted his head. Something wrong? Derek swallowed hard. Logan stammered, we didn't mean, this is just what? Ethan's voice was calm, lethal. Logan's hands went up in surrender. We were just trying to keep the community safe. Ethan let out a sharp exhale. Oh, this was going to be fun. Flipping the confiscated plastic cuffs in his grip, he studied them for a moment before flicking his gaze back to the two men. How's that working out for you? Derek's chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. His arrogance? Gone, the puffed-up bravado, gone. All that remained was a man who had just realized how royally he had screwed up. Logan cracked first. This is all a misunderstanding. His voice was higher now, wobbling at the edges. Derek nodded furiously, his head bobbing up and down like a broken toy. We were just trying to keep order. Ethan arched a brow. By impersonating law enforcement? By trying to arrest people in their own driveways? Neither of them had an answer for that. Derek took another half step back, as if he could somehow disappear into the night. But it was too late. Ethan took a slow step forward, watching as the two men visibly shrank under his gaze. Tell me something, Ethan said, his tone dropping an octave. Where'd you get these vests? They froze. He could almost hear the gears grinding in their heads, scrambling for an excuse that wouldn't sound as stupid as their entire operation. He didn't wait. Ethan's voice hardened. Where'd you get those handcuffs? The lights on your car? The radios? Logan cracked. We got them online, he blurted. It's not illegal. Ethan's jaw tightened. Oh, these guys were done. Ethan Holloway pulled out his phone, his fingers steady as he dialed. The two imposters in front of him had no idea. Their night was about to take a turn they'd never forget. This is Chief Holloway. I have 2 suspects impersonating law enforcement, possibly involved in fraudulent activity. Send a unit to my address. Derek Slater visibly paled. Wait, no. Logan Tate threw up his hands, practically vibrating with panic. Please, we were just trying to help. Ethan tilted his head, letting a slow smirk creep onto his face. The same smirk they had worn when they tried to arrest him. Tell it to the judge. Blue and red lights flickered against the night as the real police arrived. No shouting, no resistance, no last-minute escape attempts. The moment the squad cars rolled in, the 2 fake officers completely lost their nerve. Derek, the one who had been puffing out his chest just minutes ago, deflated in an instant. His hands shot up, his bravado crumbling like a house of cards. Whoa. This is all just a big misunderstanding. Logan, meanwhile, was spiraling into a full-blown meltdown. His breathing turned shallow, his eyes darting for an exit that didn't exist. He was 5 seconds away from making a run for it, and he knew it wouldn't end well. Ethan watched as Officer Ryan Mercer and Detective Cole Bennett stepped out, their expressions unreadable. Ethan didn't need to say much. He simply handed over the cheap plastic cuffs he had confiscated and gestured toward the imposters. These 2 are impersonating law enforcement. They tried to arrest me in my own driveway. The officers exchanged looks. Then, without hesitation, turn around. Logan yelped, not protested, yelped, like a scared puppy. Derek didn't even argue. He just muttered something under his breath and turned, his hands going behind his back as the cuffs clicked into place. And then things got even worse for them. The search of their fake patrol car uncovered stacks of bogus violation notices, demanding penalty fees from homeowners, official-looking HOA court summons, so illegal that Ethan had to suppress a laugh, video recordings of them shaking down residents, barking orders threatening arrests. And the worst part? Most of their victims were elderly. Ethan felt his jaw tighten as he flipped through one of the confiscated folders. Names, addresses, fine amounts. Some people had been forced to hand over hundreds of dollars, just to avoid being arrested. This wasn't just impersonation. This was predatory, and now it was over. As the squad car doors slammed shut, Ethan Holloway took a deep breath, watching as Logan Tate and Derek Slater sat, handcuffed and defeated in the back seat. Derek, who had spent the entire encounter acting like he ran the neighborhood, was now staring blankly at the floor, his face void of color. Logan, usually full of bravado, was trembling, his fingers twitching in his lap. The realization had finally hit them. They were done. Ethan stepped forward, his boots crunching against the gravel. Logan opened his mouth one last time, desperate. "We didn't do anything that bad." His voice cracked, thin and weak. "We were just trying to make people follow the rules." Ethan tilted his head, watching them both. Then, with a slow, deliberate step, he leaned in just enough that they could feel the weight of every word that came next. "You weren't enforcing anything." Silence. Derek gulped, his Adam's apple bobbing frantically. Logan tried again, voice barely above a whisper. We were just trying to make the neighborhood better." Ethan let out a slow breath. Then his voice turned cold as steel. "Real cops protect their communities." He let that sink in, let them squirm beneath it. Then in a voice that could have frozen fire, he finished. "You preyed on yours." Logan whimpered. Derek shut his eyes as if willing himself to disappear. Click. The squad car doors locked. The engine rumbled to life. Within minutes, the taillights disappeared down the road. And just like that, it was over. But for the town of Hollow Creek, the story was just beginning. Within 24 hours, the entire town knew what had happened. The HOA board, which had happily allowed these men to terrorize residents when it suited them, was now scrambling for cover. "We had no knowledge of their actions," they insisted. "We do not condone impersonation of law enforcement." But the damage was already done. By the end of the week, multiple homeowners pressed charges, especially the elderly residents who had been bullied into paying bogus fines. Some had drained their savings, believing they were avoiding real legal trouble. By the end of the month, the case made national news. And Ethan? Ethan finally got his hot shower, finally let the tension bleed from his shoulders as steam filled the bathroom, washing away the exhaustion of a 20-hour shift, a fake arrest and the sheer stupidity of the human race. And as the water poured over him, he thought to himself, "This is why I do this job. Not for the paperwork, not for the headaches, but for nights like this, where he could shut down the worst kind of people, the wannabe cops, the predators in uniforms they didn't deserve, the ones who thought power was a game, right up until they met someone who actually knew how to play." Ethan Holloway finally locked his door, the weight of the night settling on his shoulders. It was over. Outside, the distant hum of squad cars faded, carrying Logan Tate and Derek Slater toward a future they hadn't planned for. For the first time in 20 hours, Ethan allowed himself to breathe. He moved through his house, kicking off his boots, peeling away the weight of the night like old armor. The exhaustion was bone deep, but the job was done. The town of Hollow Creek was finally rid of its fake enforcers. With a slow exhale, he stepped into the steaming heat of the shower, letting the tension bleed from his muscles. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Not the arrests, not the headlines, just this stillness. As water poured down, Ethan thought about the case, about how close those two idiots had come to getting someone seriously hurt. They weren't the first, they wouldn't be the last, but tonight they had lost, and that was enough. The next morning, Hollow Creek was buzzing. The footage of Logan and Derek being hauled off in cuffs had gone viral. Neighbors who had been too scared to speak out were now calling the police with statements, evidence, receipts. The HOA board, once so confident, so untouchable, was now in full retreat. "We had no knowledge of their actions," they insisted. "We do not condone impersonation of law enforcement." But the damage was already done. By the end of the week, homeowners had filed lawsuits, demanding refunds for the bogus fines they had been coerced into paying. Some of them had lost thousands. By the end of the month, the state had opened an official investigation, and by the end of the year, the entire HOA board had resigned. No one wanted to be connected to the scam that had rocked the town. Justice had taken its time, but it had come all the same. And Ethan? Ethan had already moved on. There would always be another case, another fight, another long shift. But for now he had a fresh cup of coffee. Quiet morning, a town that was just a little safer than it had been yesterday. And that was enough. Because at the end of the day, Ethan didn't do this job for the power, the title, or the authority. He did it because someone had to. And that was what made all the difference.